Good morning, everybody. We're going to get started in just a minute. We'll just wait a few more minutes for everyone to join. Welcome to our webinar, Boosting Pro Bono in the Post-COVID World. We'll be kicking off in just a moment. We'll just get started in a moment, just waiting for a few more people to join us. All right, let's get started. Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining our first online session of the Australian Pro Bono Network. I'm Sally McGeoch, the co-chair, along with Megan Ball of Ernst & Young of the Australian Pro Bono Network. And I'm also the senior advisor at Westpac Foundation, where I manage our grant and pro bono programs. But first, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the lands from which we are taking part today, and pay my respects to their elders, both past and present, and to emerging community leaders. And for me, that is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. Now, before we get started, there's a little housekeeping, and many of you would be familiar with this, having used Zoom before. But if you're not on speaker view, I'd recommend you just switch to that now, just to ensure that when you're viewing the webinar, you see the guests when they speak. And we've also put everyone on mute, and we'd ask that you stay on mute if possible for the duration of the initial discussion, and then we ask that you have any questions, please just post them in the chat at any point during the webinar, and we will have plenty of time for Q&A towards the end. So just go ahead and pop any questions or comments or links or anything you'd like to share with the group in the chat. We'd also like to let you know that we are recording this session, so you can share the recording with any colleagues or peers who are unable to attend. And before I start and introduce our speakers for today, I'd just like to tell you a little bit more about the Australian Pro Bono Network. The network was actually first established by Jennifer Bishop from Resonate Consulting a number of years ago, who is now working in the social impact sector in the UK. And we're really a practitioner-led community of corporates that exists to promote knowledge sharing and collaboration around best practice in pro bono and skilled volunteering. We're seeking to promote the business value of pro bono and skilled volunteering alongside the community value for sustainability and impact. And for the past 3 years, we've set out to do this by hosting a number of very well-attended annual summits. But this year, obviously, things are a little different. And so this is our first virtual summit. And really the focus of the network is around 3 key objectives, which is to engage and grow a connected community of pro bono practitioners, to equip you with the skills and knowledge and insights, drawing on international best practice, and to empower you to scale and grow corporate pro bono programs. So that's why we're here today, and there's no doubt that the COVID crisis has amplified our sense of interconnectedness, and for many, the desire to support others, particularly organisations on the front line, helping our most vulnerable Australians. Despite the lockdown, there's been a spike in volunteering, which I'm sure we'll hear more about today, on many platforms, and the need has never been greater among our community organisations that we're seeking to serve, to access the skills of corporate Australia to help them survive and thrive. There's a real opportunity for us to ramp up corporate pro bono efforts and tap into employee desire to use their skills for impact. We think the global crisis should be a wake-up call for businesses to really re-examine their role in society and match community expectations in creating a more equitable and sustainable world. And we're pleased to be joined today by 2 people who are uniquely placed to comment on this opportunity for businesses to ramp up and how corporates are responding. So I'd like to introduce you to Gabriele Christian-Hare. Gabriele is the CEO of the Australian Pro Bono Centre, which is Australia's Centre for Leadership for Pro Bono Legal Services. And the Centre's mission is really to grow participation and excellence in pro bono across the legal profession. She also works with our Australian Pro Bono Network to help support growth in corporate pro bono more broadly. In a past life, she was a corporate finance lawyer and has also worked for the UNHCR in Syria and as a special advisor to Tony Blair's team in Jerusalem before joining the Australian Pro Bono Centre. So we're really looking forward to hearing from you, Gabriele. And then we have Chris Venter all the way from Calgary. Welcome, Chris. Chris leads business development for the APAC and European regions at Benevity, a global leader in community investment technology. And I'm sure many of you have heard or are using Benevity in your corporate environments now. Benevity is a platform that provides workplace giving, volunteering, and integrated grant management solutions to many of the world's most iconic companies. So let's get started. I have a number of questions that I'm going to throw to both Gabby and Chris, but as I mentioned, we're really keen to make this interactive. So please just pop any questions you have in the chat and we'll pick them up towards the end of the session. So Gabby, my first question is to you, and I noted, and what actually kicked off this webinar was a piece that you wrote on your LinkedIn where you argued that pro bono from the business sector is going to be critical to addressing the challenges we face in recovering from COVID. And I just wondered if you could share a little bit of your thinking about that article with people on this webinar today.
Well, firstly, thank you very much, Sally, and to the Australian Pro Bono Network for the opportunity to speak in the webinar today. And thank you to everyone for joining. At the Australian Pro Bono Network events, the Q&As tend to be highly interactive affairs. So I'm looking forward to speaking to you all later in the session. So my article was and is very much a clarion call or call to action to the private sector. I wrote the article at the height of the lockdown here in Australia, when the number of deaths from COVID was continuing to rise exponentially globally, and a few things were becoming abundantly clear. So as Sally has said, the pandemic has, of course, shown us in very stark terms just how interconnected and interdependent we are. That we don't live in isolation within our own countries or even globally. And of course, in Australia, we saw this already through the shocking bushfires that we experienced over the Australian summer, which were a real light bulb moment, a moment of realization, I think, for many of us, that we really do need to work together as a global community for a number of reasons, and in that case, for a more sustainable future for our planet. And I think the implications of our interconnectedness have been felt on a very grand scale and very immediately through the pandemic. Secondly, at the Australian Pro Bono Centre, we continue to see the scale of need in our communities, which is quite frankly enormous, notwithstanding the level of government assistance that's been provided in response to the pandemic. And at the centre, we're tapped in primarily to legal need, but legal need is a consequence and an expression of the range of problems that vulnerable individuals in our communities face, from lack of housing to loss of jobs, to mental health issues, to family violence, you name it. And we also see the impact of the pandemic on the organisations in our community, which provide vital assistance to a range of disadvantaged client groups. So namely charities, not-for-profits, social enterprises, community legal centres, and how they have been suffering and the vital support that they need right now and into the future. And thirdly, I think all of us have had to make a decision about our own response to the crisis. How are we going to manage our family life? How are we going to manage our work? And my view is that COVID has presented a real opportunity and a need, in fact, for brave and daring leaders to use their influence much more actively to drive better outcomes for the world and lead on some of society's most pressing issues. And unfortunately, especially with many governments in disrepute, there is also, I think, a growing expectation by society that the private sector will play an expanded role in serving and protecting our communities beyond fulfilling narrow business or commercial objectives. Over the last decade, we've seen, of course, an enormous growth in CSR practices, and now there's a real focus on ESG, environmental, social governance, and determining what the S means, I think, is the trickiest of all. It's clear that it involves protection of human rights throughout value chains, it involves philanthropy, and very recently, especially, we've seen a more general trend towards the C-suite being called out and pressure tested by consumers on where they stand on certain topics. So, for example, recently, with the brutal killing of George Floyd, we've seen many corporations, Nike, Twitter, Citibank, just to name a few, multiple, aligning themselves with the Black Lives Matter movement. So the S in ESG does indeed take many forms, but my view is that the pandemic has given the private sector a real opportunity to think even more radically about how it can use its resources and influence and leverage its networks and its infrastructure to be an essential actor in driving positive change. So if organisations want to differentiate themselves not just on function but on values and be truly active in their support of the S in ESG, and ensure that they're not just paying lip service to social virtues, those resources, in my view, should include the sharing of the skills, talents, expertise, and creativity of staff through pro bono work. So in summary, my article is very much a call to action to the private sector, and in some ways a call for a slightly revised and perhaps you might say a more enlightened model of capitalism that recognises our shared humanity, recognises the growing level of need in our communities, and recognises the opportunity and the expectation of the private sector to step up and use this opportunity through pro bono. And I'm really pleased to see that so many have done just that. And I know Chris is going to provide some examples. Thanks, Sally.
Well, thank you, Gabby. It's very inspiring, and it's definitely in my role. I loved reading your article, and you know, it's very validating that what we're doing is so important, not only for companies but employees as well at this time. And I was curious sort of what you've seen from the legal sector in terms of demand for pro bono in Australia since COVID.
Yeah, well, to be expected, demand has risen significantly, both demand from disadvantaged and vulnerable individuals, and also demand from community organisations, charities, not-for-profits, community legal centres, etc., which provide vital assistance to those individuals. Just to reel off a few stats that we've seen and heard of at the Australian Pro Bono Centre. So Justice Connect, which is the pro bono legal referral scheme operating in New South Wales and Victoria, which refers pro bono matters for both individuals and organisations seeking assistance. They, a week or so ago, reported that traffic to their website has more than doubled since the start of March 2020, and referrals are up by 36% on the 3 months before, bearing in mind that referrals were already higher than normal earlier in the year following the bushfires. The head of the New South Wales Peak Body for Community Legal Centres noted also a week or so ago that there's been a 30% rise in demand at CLCs. And this unprecedented rise in need is, of course, reflected in the significant increase in the amount of pro bono work taken on by firms. So recently, one of the top tier firms reported a 40% rise in pro bono work compared to the same period last year. Another doubled the amount of work they're doing. Another found that 60% of new matters were COVID related. And so that sort of gives an indication across both disadvantaged individuals and community organisations. But in discussions with some of the largest global charities with operations in Australia, we know that they are seeking pro bono support across the board, not just legal, but IT, marketing and comms, accounting, project management, etc. And that's, of course, both to meet the increasing level of need within the community, but also because many of them have not been receiving the public donations that they used to receive. Over the bushfire season in Australia in particular, many people redirected their charitable donations to bushfire-related aid, which of course was very important. But subsequently, with job losses associated with COVID and or nervousness around future job losses, we see people aren't donating to a wide range of causes and a wide range of charities in the same way. So yes, in summary, there's a huge demand for pro bono support at the moment, we would say.
Yes, I think most people on the call would have experienced that, as we have as well at Westpac. And I'd love to hear from Chris now, you know, with your sort of umbrella view, working with so many different corporates, both in Australia and internationally, what trends have you seen both pre-COVID and post in terms of the spike in skilled volunteering and pro bono?
Thanks, Ali. And firstly, thank you so much for inviting me to join the webinar. We're very excited about our client community in Australia and beyond, so it's fantastic to be here with you all. I'm going to echo a lot of the things that Gabby said, actually. You know, the focus on ESG for organizations and the role of the corporation in society is completely being reevaluated, especially over the last couple of years. We've seen a big trend in that. And this is from the top investors, you know, really scrutinizing ESG reporting much more, because it's been shown that companies that score high on ESG tend to be more successful in the long run. And there's some interesting stats from Bank of America that showed that 15 of the S&P 500 that went bankrupt between 2005 and 2015 scored low on ESG in the 5 years before they went bankrupt. So this is becoming a very big indicator. So the response during COVID, and now with the movement to fight for justice and equity and address systemic racism in the US, but also globally, has been immense from our client community. I think clients are realizing that it's not just about profits anymore. They have to be an authentic part of the community. And through that, we'll actually deliver business results as well. A good example is now one of our clients, Apple, is currently doing a 2-to-1 match for all employee donations for the month of June, really empowering their people to take action in whatever way they want to, and putting that power in the hands of their employees. And the most progressive companies are realizing that, you know, when you truly empower your most important asset, which is your people, and you allow them to contribute their time, their skills, or their donations, then the entire community and their business will benefit. And we're seeing our clients really step up during the COVID crisis. It's been just immense to see how they're, as Gabby mentioned, supporting all those causes that are suffering tremendously because they cannot do their traditional fundraising events. They've been completely hamstrung with no volunteers. And this is the time where they really need the corporate sector support. From a skills-based volunteering aspect, it's been evolving, and you know, the need has been there a lot more before COVID. COVID has kind of, you know, brought that to the forefront, and technology especially has helped, given that people are looking for virtual ways or remote ways to help. We're seeing the technology become more crucial, where, you know, an entire group may not be able to go to a charity's premises to help, but they still need, as Gabby mentioned, support in many different ways. And this is where the connected platforms are helping causes to kind of list those skills they need, list the kind of resources they need, and for our corporate clients to find the connection point to support those causes. And we see that post-COVID, that will just increase, as well as, you know, the new normal might be completely different, and technology is going to be the way for us to hopefully connect people and connect those causes to the skills that they need.
Thanks, Chris. I was just curious, from both of your perspectives, how you've seen businesses responding and adapting their skill volunteering programs since COVID-19. Maybe Chris, if you wanted to go first and draw on any examples among the companies that you support.
Absolutely, yeah. So obviously the biggest thing is virtual volunteering has suddenly become front of mind for every company. How do we do it? How do we find opportunities? How do we go about it? So that's been the biggest shift. The nice thing with skills-based volunteering is it's it's traditionally been virtual in a lot of cases. So, doing board service or even helping with financial reporting, things like that, you can do in a remote setting for a lot of causes. But COVID has accelerated the use of technology tremendously. What we have seen is a lot of companies really taking action and understanding that many causes are not really that far advanced with digital technology. They need a lot of assistance from the ground up. Very basic things like setting up a webinar with a Zoom call or a Skype call is still new to a lot of organizations. And companies can start from a baseline to really just help them with these basic adoption of technology to get a Zoom license or apply through TechSoup for software packages, to get that at cost price, things like that. So our clients have kind of stepped up there to help organizations adopt technology from the ground up, which is important. And then we're seeing companies really open up their programs more. So they're removing thresholds like you have to take a day at a time to volunteer. They're allowing their employees to take small actions now, like volunteering for 30 minutes or an hour and tracking their time towards their volunteering time. We've had one client that essentially set up a program where it's a technology client, SAP, out of Germany, but they essentially allowed their employees to help other employees by doing Zoom reading lessons for other employees with kids to give them a break so they can put them in front of the screen and do something educational. It's just one example to broaden volunteering, essentially. And they've just made it easier. One really big thing we've seen is they've made it easier for their employees to earn rewards for their volunteering as well. So where before they would have thresholds for employees to earn volunteer rewards, which they can then donate to the cause of their choice, such as you have to volunteer 10 or 20 hours and then get a $250 reward. They're now making it easy for them to earn $20 per hour for volunteering, which the employee can then give back in a micro donation to a charity, which helps those small causes that have not been able to fundraise or continue with their flow of micro donations that have been coming in traditionally. So there are a number of things, and obviously the granting process, many of our clients have made their grants a lot easier for charities to apply for. They've made it a lot shorter process so that they can support those smaller organizations as well.
Thanks, Chris. Gabby, have you seen similar innovations happening in the legal sector in Australia in terms of how businesses are adapting their programs?
Yes, absolutely. So echoing what Chris has said, certainly regulations around social distancing and limits on gathering have forced pro bono providers to adapt rather rapidly and be innovative. And this has made quite a significant difference to the way that pro bono support is being provided. So, of course, a lot of pro bono advice is now being provided by telephone and video conferencing, as to be expected. We've seen that training for volunteers has transitioned to online platforms. Many resources for not-for-profits and other community organisations are now online. We've seen a significant rise in the use of webinars and the production of fact sheets as well, both for community organisations and for members of the public to help disseminate information. Interestingly, we've seen a rise in virtual secondments, especially to expand the capacity of organisations on the front line. So pro bono providers are now thinking much more creatively about how they can use their own resources and thinking laterally, internally about how to arrange secondments, which has been fantastic. And just as an aside, this has, of course, tremendous possibilities for assistance needed in rural and remote communities, which would be a great development, especially in Australia. Interestingly, at the centre, we conduct a detailed survey of pro bono practices of law firms in particular, of 50 or more lawyers every 2 years. And through that survey, we haven't seen secondment numbers rise much at all through that since 2012, with a number of firms also commenting that they have less capacity for secondments, but we've seen a real about-turn on secondments in response to the pandemic. Also, I just wanted to note that the level of collaboration within the pro bono community has also risen. So Ashurst has been sharing regular telephone and video calls with members of the pro bono community and other organisations on the front line, which has been a great way to share experiences and discuss key issues. And the firm also used its software to create a a global COVID-19 coordination and planning website platform. And this has enabled a wide range of organisations to track and analyse issues emerging from the pandemic across 41 countries, which has been terrifically helpful as well. And so, yes, to conclude, we've seen a lot of innovation and adaptation by pro bono providers in response to the pandemic.
Thanks, Gabby. And I know with Westpac, with our commitment to Joe and secondments, I'm very curious as to, how they move towards virtual secondments as maybe an example of how we might be able to do that for other programs as well. And you mentioned the collaboration, and we've noticed that as well. And I'm sure a lot of people on this webinar have, in terms of how can we work with others to mobilize these resources quickly. And our focus at the foundation is on social enterprise, and we've been working with Social Impact Hub and Social Traders and a number of corporates, including Minter Ellison, to get pro bono business support to social enterprises quickly. So yeah, I'm sure lots of those sorts of collaborations will start to form, which is exciting. I guess my next question is a little bit more about whether you see skill volunteering more or less important now for companies, and why, and how do you think skill volunteering in contrast to unskilled volunteering is progressing in the sector? So maybe Gabby, if you wanted to respond to that first.
Sure. So in my view, yes, I would say it's important for companies, no question. And I think if companies are proactive now, they will distinguish themselves from their competitors. And I hope it gets to the point that in the future that the corporations will actually stand out for not doing pro bono. At the Australian Po Bono Centre, we see that pro bono is progressively becoming more of an important tool to attract and retain the best people. And as I mentioned in my article, crises like the pandemic really do test our values. And I think COVID has made many of us realise that we want jobs that not only further our organisation's commercial interests, but also contribute more broadly to the world around us as well. So in our view, if organisations get this right, they'll not only attract the best recruits post-COVID, but they also should enjoy higher retention rates as well, especially when it comes, I think, to recruiting younger staff members who have grown up with a real social conscience. And if this is the case, then this will ultimately, of course, benefit the bottom line. I wanted to mention that a couple of weeks ago, Volunteering Australia issued a report indicating actually that involvement in pro bono and volunteering does have a positive impact on life satisfaction and psychological stress. The study indicated that all Australians experienced a decline in life satisfaction between January and April 2020. However, there was a significantly smaller decline in life satisfaction for those volunteers who stopped volunteering compared to those who did not stop volunteering compared to those who stopped or never volunteered in the first place, which I thought was very interesting. But to answer your question, well, Sally, about skilled volunteering versus unskilled volunteering, I think offering a platform to staff in their professional life to contribute their own skills to the betterment of society and help those less fortunate than themselves is a form of empowerment, quite simply, that leads to a dual sense of pride, both in oneself and in one's employer. And there is certainly a time and a place for unskilled volunteering, no question, for simply helping out on more routine tasks. But in my view, I think there is a heightened sense of pride, if you like, that comes from using your own skills, your talents, and your own expertise and unique creativity to help those in need. And my view too is that as clients or customers, suppliers, and other key stakeholders, including investors, increasingly focus on their own responsible business programs and practices, they will favour relationships with organisations who do the same. And pro bono is one very important manifestation of those responsible business practices. And there are other benefits as well. I could go on and on about the benefits of pro bono, but even from the point of view of looking at professional development possibilities for staff, the opportunity to exercise their skills and judgment in a new context, this leads to significant professional growth. And I think there'll be greater demand by staff for this in the future as well. So yes, I think for a number of reasons, it's an important strategy for organisations.
Thanks, Gabby. It's always great to hear about those business cases for pro bono, and a new one I'm thinking about is this resilience, because obviously I know at Westpac we're being offered a lot of webinars and opportunities to sort of focus on our mental health during this time, and pro bono is another really valuable way to address that. So Chris, I just was curious about any particular examples you might want to share about some of the new skilled volunteering programs that you've seen emerging, and the value of sort of skilled versus unskilled volunteering in the sector.
Yeah, I think there's absolutely a place for both. We obviously work with clients in a very diverse client community, all the way from manufacturing, retail, to highly skilled organizations like Microsoft, SAP, Google, etc. And you know, there's definitely a place for both. We were able to produce a study in 2018 that looked at about 2 million users in our platform from around 120 different enterprise companies around the world. And the data showed that companies that had higher participation in their giving and volunteering programs were able to reduce turnover by up to 57% more. So employees that volunteered and participated more in their community program were up to 57% more likely to stay with the organization longer. We also had another financial services client that shared data with us from their program that showed that employees that participated more in volunteering were also more likely to be promoted internally in the organization more regularly. So those connections are all there. You know, I think most of us suspect those data points, and they have been proven in many cases. It just shows the importance of these programs. When we look at skills versus non-skills, you know, I agree with Gabby, there's a place for both, and different programs have a need for both. I think one example would be, you know, a retail client of ours. They have a ton of retail employees, obviously, but they've turned their volunteering program, which may not be highly skilled in the beginning, into a career development opportunity for their employees, where they apply to become a volunteer or local champion in their location. They would go through training on how to use the technology and how to train their cause partners on also using the technology to get more engagement from the employees. So these employees would be a champion for a year period where they're in the role. They would go out and engage with causes. They would go through training on how to do that and help them to better use the system to drive more volunteering participation with the cause and increase donations. And they've shown that causes that actually go through this program with their volunteer champions increase engagement, so donations and volunteering, by up to 7 times. So that is actually giving the employee the skills through this program as well, developing them and giving them more of a sense of impact, as well as the cause on the other side. I think from the highly skilled side, we've seen something similar to what Gabby mentioned with secondment. So SAP has a fantastic program called Social Sabbatical. They basically, people would apply to become part of their Social Sabbatical program, and they would send out a team of experts from diverse groups in SAP to solve problems with causes on a 4-week term, essentially. They would spend a full 4 weeks helping this cause or social enterprise to evolve and get through a difficult strategic block. Those employees then come back to the organization and become advocates for the program internally, obviously, and they help them then across the world to spread the news of what they're doing. So that's a really great way of a highly skilled organization that will put together a strategic team, as they would do for any other product in their organization. They have that kind of support and investment, and sending them out to solve these issues. And I'll end off just my point there with, we had our annual conference recently where all our clients come together in California once a year, and I sat in on a presentation from the Apple team. And the Apple program manager made a very good point. She said they have a very successful program, high participation, and it's world class. But their community investment program is treated at the same level of respect as any other product at Apple. So it's treated with the same respect as if they were building a new iPhone or if they were building a new MacBook. They get the same kind of support, they have the same seat at the table, and that's how they're able to drive the success. If the program internally is seen as something that's just nice to have and on the side, you're not going to see the success. So hopefully, as these conversations are moving to the more senior executive level, those things will become second nature, where these companies are truly investing in allowing their employees the time to do these skills-based and other volunteering as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Chris, for those insights. Fascinating. And I think there's been a couple of notes on the chat. Some of the data that you were referring to, I know some of it's just client data that you've been able to access through your relationships. And Gabby, some of the data you've referred to, if you're able to send that through to us, we'll circulate it with the recording to everyone on the chat, because I think that really helps reinforce the business value if we're able to kind of quote some of those statistics that you mentioned. So I've got a couple of questions that have come in to me privately. Feel free to just post your questions though to everyone on the chat if you like. One is from Anna. Hi Anna from Macquarie. She's asked, do you know, Chris, how big the ESG corporate CSA teams are on average at Benevity clients? We often discuss these things across Australia. How big is your team to do all of that work? Asking to identify how much resources tend to be allocated to facilitate virtual skilled volunteering from the corporate side. Like, are you seeing that it's requiring more effort or less effort with the clients that you're supporting?
Yeah, there's obviously different sizes of teams with different companies with different investment. And hi Anna, we've spoken a few times in the past. I think that, yes, the bigger and more successful programs have bigger teams. They have teams upward of 5 people in their program, but that incorporates both giving and volunteering. The most effective programs that we see encourage a couple of things. They encourage user-generated content where their employees are empowered to actually create volunteering opportunities and reach out to colleagues to find support within the organization. So it's not just controlled by administrators. Secondly, they have a really strong local champions or volunteer champions network, where they have people on the ground in different office locations that help them to run the program, help them to engage with local causes. And that champions network is well designed, it's programmatic, it has funding to provide the champions with some funding so they can do things on the ground locally. They really empower those champions. Even if it's not part of their day-to-day job, they're doing that as a volunteer essentially. They still feel empowered and they feel a part of the community team. And I think that's really one of the top best practices for our volunteering clients, is to develop that really strong local champions network. But I know I can definitely follow up with you with more stats on the size of teams as well, just for interest sake.
Thanks, Chris. Gabby, did you have any thoughts on that question as well, in terms of how you've seen legal firms resource the virtual volunteering?
Well, the resourcing virtual volunteering has really been about going to existing referral schemes and other community partners to receive pro bono work, and then using internal processes to ensure that advice and representation is provided using technology and other facilities as can be done at the moment. So it's really been a question of, I think, business as usual, but using different technology and different methods to facilitate the work at the moment.
Thank you.
So I'd like to just add something there. I think that from a base level, we have a pretty robust portal where causes can connect with their corporate partners, post opportunities, post volunteering events, etc. But we really have found that so many cause partners are very far behind when we think about digital adoption and being able to use technology. So there is a real opportunity for companies to really start at the baseline and help their cause partners at a very simplistic level to understand of how to access talent, because they really don't have a strong concept of how to use all the different platforms, all the different avenues yet. So there is tremendous opportunity there to start with them from the ground up.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Thanks, Chris. I know with the community partners we have at Westpac Foundation, that sort of digital skills and digital transformation is something we've been focusing on as well. Many of them are delivering training or employment programs which have had to go on hold because they can no longer do it face-to-face, and they're having to pivot to do that virtually, but haven't ever sort of delivered content virtually before. And so trying to get those sorts of skills and support has been really important at this time. Keep the questions coming. I've got more of a comment here from Keith from Minters. I guess it's something that he's observed, which is he's seen a real need in small business as well, that, you know, obviously being not being a not-for-profit, they're not currently covered by pro bono programs, but very small sort of Indigenous-owned businesses and other small businesses that might have a sort of a for-purpose focus. He's seen a lot of demand coming through as well. I don't know, Gabby, if you've got any thoughts or comments on that statement by Keith, but obviously a lot of pro bono programs might be only open to the not-for-profit sector, but what potential there is for some of these smaller businesses to access support.
Yes, this is a really interesting question, actually. Thanks, Keith. So we, at one point, actually sort of in the middle of the lockdown, we at the centre did actually consider, given the increasing demand from small businesses for assistance, whether we should be opening up our definition of pro bono legal services to not just work for disadvantaged individuals and certain community organisations, but whether we should consider allowing, or at least recognising, I should say, that work through our definition, and therefore have it reportable through the target as well. I think where we came to with that is that because, at least in Australia, there has been quite, let's say, reasonable government grants provided for small businesses. And we felt it was a little early for the centre to make a call on it, where rather we had to move further through the crisis and then at a later date reevaluate and see just what level of demand we have, depending on how long government grants continue for, and especially when they end, what the level of need looks like. I mean, certainly, I think, you know, looking at our current definition, the work that we would encourage in relation to small businesses would be those businesses that are one-person operations, definitely, and family operations as well, so that if that person or family is if the business is impacted, then essentially the whole ownership of the business is also impacted. The people who run the business are also impacted. So that's our thoughts at the moment from the centre on small business work.
Thanks, Gabby. I don't have any other questions here on the chat, but I had another question from the working group here. We were curious to hear from both of you in terms of what you see as the future of skill volunteering and pro bono, and how it's viewed in the corporate context and facilitated, I guess, sort of in the next potentially 6 months or so in this kind of recovery period and beyond. I'm just wondering, Chris, if you would like to answer that first.
Yeah, I mean, if we look at what we've spoken about now, the importance of ESG, organizations recognizing that it's not good enough to just stand back. Organizations have to take a stand. They have to help solve these societal issues and bigger environmental issues that we're facing on a more regular basis. And hopefully that leads to more progressive programs, more funding, and more aligned partnerships with causes that are actually making an impact. The future is digital in every sense. It needs to be technology driven, as we've seen with this pandemic. Causes need to be able to identify at a granular level what they need to help them succeed, and find those people in the community or within corporates to help them do that. And we work hard on obviously facilitating that. Secondly, the data on the back end is increasingly important for companies to be able to measure how successful their program is, to measure some of these things that I'm speaking about, where companies can measure the fact that their volunteers are more likely to be promoted, or that it leads to better leadership skills in the organization. So having accurate data to report on the success of the program is crucial for corporates, which will allow them to gain more funding for their programs, because they can show the success of their programs as well. We had one more story that was really interesting in the sense of data. One of our clients, their program manager took a really innovative way of just getting more of their senior managers engaged in volunteerism. She looked at the data from their employee giving and volunteering program in the different office locations in the US, and looked at the causes that their employees tend to support more often in those locations. Then she did an internal survey with senior managers to ask them about their interests. And she was able to align a few senior managers with causes in those locations through that data. So they already knew their employees were engaging with these causes in those locations. And then she was able to get some of those senior managers onto the board with those charities in those office locations, which helped drive more engagement in future again. So with accurate data, you're able to do that. Without data, it becomes very difficult to show success and to basically evolve your program as well.
Fantastic. Gabby, did you have any responses to that question? I've got a couple more coming in as well. Actually, maybe I'll add this to your list in terms of future outlook. We've got a question for you about how much has the pro bono target for law firms been responsible for embedding pro bono in the legal sector?
Okay, sure. I'll definitely come to that. Firstly, with predictions for the future, I think this could be the subject of a whole other webinar, actually. But just to sort of reel a few off, I mean, certainly, of course, we expect the level of demand for skilled volunteering and pro bono will increase. I wanted to mention actually a report that was launched by Social Ventures Australia and the Centre for Social Impact last week on the 3rd of June in particular, which forecasts that more than 200,000 jobs in the charity sector could be lost if government financial support comes to an end in October. Many have already shut down programs and services already, and more is predicted. So there'll certainly be increased demand for in-kind support. And of course, at the same time, there'll be an increased demand from vulnerable individuals, especially as government grants come to an end. So overall, I think demand will continue to rise. I think assuming that pro bono does continue to grow post-COVID, I think it's predictable that there'll be more dedicated pro bono career roles within corporates. And those people will, of course, be tasked with seeking pro bono opportunities on behalf of organisations that match the skill sets of their staff, and coordinating and distributing the work internally. We've, of course, seen that in the legal profession, and I absolutely predict that will occur across the corporate sector as well. And I think there'll be as pro bono grows, I think there'll be further development of the wider ecosystem to assist pro bono delivery. So more structured pro bono referral schemes that can act as a middleman between middle person, I should say, between pro bono providers and seekers. And also, I think there'll be more of a demand for organisations that can help pro bono seekers, community organisations in particular, ready themselves to accept volunteers as well. And as Chris said, I think I concur that technology will continue to play a huge role. And also echoing Chris's thoughts about the measuring of pro bono involvement and impact, I think we'll see a range of different measures set up to encourage skilled volunteering, but also to measure it. And I mean, there's of course a range of different methods for measuring that we see across ESG practices. And one of them, of course, is the Australian Pro Bono Centre's National Pro Bono Target. So this is probably a nice segue into that question. Yes, I think the target has had an enormous impact on the growth of pro bono in the legal profession. What it has done is to set up a community of pro bono providers. We don't provide reports on pro bono hours identified. They're all done anonymously, but nonetheless, it provides a way for pro bono providers to track the hours that they do against other firms through our reporting. And I think there's nothing like setting a goal. It's like that, you know, across a range of different aspects of our lives. If we set a figure and we create a vision for the amount of work we can do, chances are in time we'll reach it. And we see it now that the target is 12 years old, that over half of the current signatories to the target actually do more than the 35 hours. The target's been so successful that from the 1st of July this year, we're going to open up the target to corporate in-house teams and government teams in respect of the legal pro bono work that they do, in the hope that it will have a similar impact in growing in-house pro bono as well. And just one extra thing to mention is that where the target has had enormous success is that it's now integrated into the government legal purchasing arrangements by a number of Australian governments, the Commonwealth Government and a number of state governments. So that means that firms that go on their panels to provide legal services to the government are required to not only be on our target, to be signatories to our target, but also to report hours of pro bono work to those governments. And this has been an incredibly successful way, of course, in focusing the mind of pro bono providers to be doing pro bono work to a certain level.
Thanks, Gabby. And I know within the working group of the Australian Pro Bono Network, we have been discussing what it would look like to have a corporate pro bono target as well. And we are looking to do some research in that space. So if anyone on the call is interested, please get in touch, because we do think that, like with the legal sector, although there are different, it's a different environment, obviously, in the broader corporate sector, that it could be a very powerful tool to increase pro bono take up for our communities. So I'd love to sort of move to some other questions, but I'm worried we'll run out of time to sort of wrap up. And I guess the good news is we are going to have another webinar. This is the first of a series, and some of the questions that have come through we'll seek to address in the next one, which I'll introduce in a minute. But before I do, one of my lovely working group co-hosts has prepared a poll for everyone on the webinar. So Farrell, if you're able to launch the Zoom poll, here we go. Just 2 questions to get a bit of feedback from you. We're learning, we're adapting, as everyone is, about how we can deliver content and engage members. So just quickly, if you're able to fill that out, that would be fantastic. And while you're doing that, I just wanted to extend a really warm thank you to Gabby and Chris, who have joined us and really prepared to give you some fantastic insights today from their perspectives. Gabby, obviously from the legal sector, but she's been working in this space for a long time, is incredibly knowledgeable. And Chris, from his sort of umbrella perspective, working with Benevity, a very large platform provider who has great insights into sort of trends in the sector. So thank you so much both for joining us today. We will mine them for some links to some data that we can share with you all. And would like to just quickly promote our next webinar, which is in 2 weeks' time on Wednesday, June 24 at 10 Australian Eastern Standard Time. So Roberta from Energy Australia will be taking over the chair role for that session, and we'll be discussing how to set up your pro bono program, because we realise on our working group we're mostly larger corporates who have somewhat established programs, but there are a lot of people in the network that are looking at setting up programs from scratch or pivoting existing programs to adapt to some of the changes we've been discussing today, from a risk, a legal perspective, a policy perspective, as well as just how to find opportunities and facilitate them. And we've got Anna from Macquarie joining us as a panelist for that session, and also Dan Creasy from King & Wood Mallison. So really looking forward to that session. We'll include a link in our follow-up email in case you haven't registered for that. And also a link to our LinkedIn group. So we can continue to share, and we encourage you to share any insights or information that you come across that might be useful for building everyone's collective knowledge and connection around pro bono. So I'd like to thank everyone for joining today. I know we have a lot of webinars in our days, and so any feedback you have in addition to this poll, feel free to send through on other topics that you might be interested in us addressing. So thanks so much for joining us. Thanks to the wider working group that have been involved in pulling this and the next one together, and we look forward to joining you again in a couple of weeks. So thanks very much and have a fantastic day.
Thanks everyone, bye.
Thanks very much everyone. Thanks Sally.